Good afternoon, National Young Writers Festival. My name is Justina Ashman, and I'll be half moderating this conversation about how to pitch. So we're looking at pitching to editors, be they for magazines or book publishers, be it fiction or nonfiction. And please feel free to post any questions that you have during the event into the chat, and we will try to address them all. I'm joined by two representatives from Pan Macmillan, Australia. We have commissioning editor Alex Lloyd and publisher Kate Blake. Alex, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Justina. I am coming to you from Darugland, and I am a young man, white, pale, unshaved, very long, uncut hair at the back, and desperate need of a haircut post-lockdown. I work
Alex and Kate, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alex.
Okay, I'll continue then. I've worked at Pan Macmillan for just over 9 years and have a great deep passion for this industry and discovering new talents. And my current role, I commission adult fiction and nonfiction in the commercial space. In nonfiction, that's things like memoirs, personal development, history, military, and in fiction, I vary widely on the commercial spectrum from action thriller, psychological thriller, family drama, and cultural investigation.
Kate? I have, my name is Kate Blake. Hello from Gadigal land. I am a white cis woman with long brown grey hair that, like Alex, desperately needs a haircut. And I'm wearing a black t-shirt, which actually has a Bon Jovi logo on it, but it's cut off by the screen. I'm sorry about that. I've worked in Australian publishing for 13 years. I started my career at Penguin Random House back when it was just Penguin Books before the merger. And I've been at Pan Macmillan as a publisher now for 2 years. Same as Alex, I publish both fiction and nonfiction for an adult readership. I know much less about children's books, but maybe Alex can speak to that more than I would be able to. In terms of the type of books that I love to work on, I do quite a lot of memoir, what I would sort of call book club fiction, which is that sort of sweet spot where both the writing and the story are at the forefront, and also books about sort of contemporary social issues, whether that be climate change, feminism, whatever it is that's sort of front of mind at the moment. So that's me.
I realized that I didn't do a physical description of myself earlier. I have long dark hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a pink knit top. And a little bit about my background is that I'm an emerging writer and editor, and I spent 2 years as the editorial assistant at Kill Your Darlings. And a lot of that was reading and assessing pitches. So most of my pitch reading experiences in literary magazines and sort of short fiction and nonfiction. We should just sort of, I guess, get started about, how do you pick a place to pitch your work to? Because I think a lot of writers might think, okay, it's best to just send as many places as possible and see who picks it up. But it is much more effective to target your pitches to a market that you think really suits the piece of writing that you're working on. How do you go about finding that market, I suppose? Would you like to start, Kate?
I think there are probably two things to think about in that regard. The first is, as you said, Justina, making sure that you are sort of aware of the publisher or the publication that you're pitching to, that you have a sense of the type of work that they like to publish and that they have been successful with. And that can be as simple as checking out their website, obviously reading as much as you can of the publications that they're producing, and also checking the acknowledgements in books that you admire and books that you would want to sort of sit alongside. And then the other thing to consider with book publishing is how to get to them, which is, I think most publishers in Australia now do accept unsolicited submissions, which is usually through their websites. They have details for how to submit your work directly, but it is still probably, I would say, not the ideal way to get your manuscript in front of a publisher. I think that it's still, just because of the sheer volume that publishers get through the unsolicited portals, it's really hard for your work to stand out in that way. So thinking about whether you go direct to an editor or enter a publishing competition like the Kill Your Darlings one that you mentioned, Justina, or if you sign up with an agent or whatever it is, there are many different ways to sort of get someone's eyes on your work.
I think with short fiction and short nonfiction is, as you said before, I think the biggest thing you can do is read. Make sure your location that you're submitting to, and you're aware of what's the kind of thing they publish. If, for example, if a literary magazine doesn't have any published poetry, they are probably not going to publish your poems. And that's a very obvious example, but a lot of the time people will pitch something to a literary magazine, not really knowing whether it is the kind of writing that they even take. Or if they don't publish fiction on a certain platform, or they only publish fiction on, in print, for example, or they only publish fiction online, knowing who you're pitching to and where, making sure that it's appropriate, because, otherwise your pitch is going to get sort of rejected by default. There's nothing they can do, even if they like it, if they...
While Justina's internet comes back, I'll jump in and add two things. First, I forgot to describe that I'm wearing a blue and green collar check shirt, first collar shirt in 4 months. And to add to that, I think being mindful of where you pitch to really shows a degree of care with your work. You've not just written something and thrown it out into the world hoping for the best that it's considered. And that's, something as basic as, do we publish those genres, or the people you're approaching publish those genres, or that type of work. But also, as little, it sounds petty, but things like the submission guidelines, following that kind of detail correctly shows us you pay attention. And also, or if you cite, and we'll get to the body of a pitch later, but things like, this book is comparable to the work of this author or that author. And if you're citing authors that are in that publisher's wheelhouse, that's showing us that you visualize, okay, I can see my work working alongside theirs. And that level of, thinking not just about your work, which is super important, but that bigger picture stuff, that shows that you're switched on as an author, and it's a career for you and not just something you've worked on, but you've given that greater thought. That also really, it not only catches our attention, it makes us engage with you quicker, and it only increases chance of success.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Alex, because with book publishing particularly, we're not just looking at the content, we're looking at you in terms of a co-worker. I mean, the writer is someone that we will have a professional relationship with for at least kind of 18 months to 2 years as we go through the editorial process, the production process, the marketing, sales, all of that. So we want someone who has not only written a brilliant book, but who behaves professionally and who sort of knows the industry in a way that will set them apart from other writers.
And to your point about checking the submissions guidelines, I think it's important to remember that they're not there to trip you up as a writer. They're not there full of traps. It's there to make the process easier for the editors and the writer, to make sure it's easier for you to find a place that's a good fit for your work. And easier for the editors to go through your work and be able to find all the information they need. Definitely following submission guidelines. It's not, it's there to make everyone's lives easier. Okay, so should we get into the actual body of the pitch? I found it interesting, Alex talking about comp titles. So what actually makes a really good comp title? Are there Like, is it too big to go? Like, do you go for the really big one and say, look what I can do? Or is that a bit of a red flag?
It's not necessarily a red flag if it's accurate. I mean, the publisher will make that assessment of, is that too big a claim for this work or not? It's got to be something that truly represents the text. And if you're saying this book is Eleanor Oliphant meets Gone Girl, okay, you're titling two big successful books there. But if you make a great comp title offering, that's evocative. And something like that, where they're two different kind of books, but you've meshed them together, that gives me immediately an image and a vibe of what this book is like. And that's intriguing instinctively. And it's immediately setting me up as a publisher to know what I'm expecting out of this and gets me excited. So be ambitious with comp titles as long as it's accurately reflective of the work. But the other thing with a comp title is, one thing we see in the slush pile a lot is there is nothing like this out there. And that's almost never true. And as different or unique or clever or original as your work might be, there's always, positive comparisons to make, or to say it's like this, but. And that's so drawing not negative, but sort of reverse comparisons also works. And be creative with it. Have fun with it, because that will get our attention very quickly.
The other thing I would say is to focus on books that are contemporary as much as possible, books that are in the market now or relatively recently. It's really hard for us to, like, even if Pride and Prejudice is a fabulous comparison for the book that you've written, it's really hard for us to sort of envisage how that would be published in this day and age in a successful manner. And that's really the question we're asking is, where does this sit on the bookshelf? What are we telling booksellers? And the other thing is, as much as possible, to try to have your comp titles to be Australian. I think that that shows a really good understanding of the local industry and the local writers that you're likely to be working alongside. And it also shows that you're understanding that you are pitching to an Australian publisher. The bulk of the books that we publish are by Australian authors for Australian readers. So again, that's the market that we're operating in and that your book will be operating in. Did you want to talk a bit, Alex, about how to structure your pitch?
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like as well, it's important to remember that that market, that you're pitching your work not just to an editor but to readers. So one thing that I think that it's important to keep in mind when you're writing a pitch is not just, why do you care about the story or the article? It's why should the editor care about it? And the reason that's very tied into why would a reader care about it? So yeah, making sure that if it's a book, I suppose, making sure it's relevant to an Australian market, but even, Australian lit journals, like, who's reading this story? Why would they be interested? Like, what, at every point in your pitch, that's something you can think about.
Yeah, and I think as well, we'll talk more later about what happens inside the publishing house, but pitching is a kind of knock-on effect. When you pitch to us, if we like your manuscript, we then have to pitch it to our colleagues. If our colleagues like it and we publish the book, they have to pitch it to retailers. If retailers like it, they have to pitch it to readers. So there's a constant sort of ongoing pitching that's happening. And so as much information you can give us on that front, it's not just to help us understand what you've written and whether or not we're going to like it. It helps us to have those other conversations and to kind of take those next steps to support your book.
And those key messages of, sometimes authors have done a great pitch summary of their work. And I've seen that go right through to sales marketing material because it works. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's not, as you said, Kate, it's not just about catching our attention. That can then get used later on. So if you've nailed that, that only maximizes things. I'll jump to structuring the pitch. This is there's not just one, okay, here's the definitive list of how to structure your pitch. And it's very different if you're pitching nonfiction, because we need much more information, and there's a lot more to assess there because we're assessing more on the proposal than, say, a work itself, whereas a novel, you have less supplementary information to give, I suppose. But so I'm not going to give an itemized list of this in this order. It's got to be whatever presents the information in a clear, accessible way, and feel free to massage it to suit your work. But my key checklist is a keynote or a log line, or that first sentence or two. Think of an original length 140 character tweet kind of that hook. What is the unique thing about the book? What's that initial thing to catch attention? That's the summary of narrative, vibe, atmosphere, genre, just that initial hook in. Then an expanded synopsis, summary, information about you as an author briefly, and any notable achievements, anything notable in your background or credentials that might be related to the novel, if that's relevant, any other particularly relevant information about you, word counts, and if there's any other key information that's unique standout you feel we need to know. They're the basics, as well as comparison titles, and that can just be a list or a sentence, or it could be a paragraph explaining, well, it's like these, but I've done this, and depending on what level of engagement you've gone to there. Would you add anything to that, Kate?
Yeah, well, the one thing I would say when you're describing your book, if you can do that as sort of concisely as possible, I think that a lot of authors, and this is true of editors as well, it's really hard to write a concise and compelling blurb or copy for the back of a book. But there's that temptation to describe every character and every hint of the plot, and to describe it the way you might describe it to your writing group or to your friends if you're sort of detailing all of the complexities of it. But really, we just want to know what will keep readers turning the page. And the other thing I would say is don't be afraid of spoilers. We need to know the good stuff that's coming. This is not the sort of standard reading experience where you want to save all the twists and turns so that the reader can be surprised by them and to get that pleasure from them. We kind of need to know up front what sort of book this is and what sort of reading experience it's going to be, so that we can judge whether what you've done has achieved what you aim to do.
And in a pitch to a literary mag, you would that subject line, I suppose, very important as being that hook for the editor of sort of showing exactly what the piece is going to be. And I think a really common thing to think about is that you're more than just talking about a topic that you want to write about. You have to have an argument or an angle or a perspective on it that is, that's the point of interest. It's not just the topic. You wouldn't say that you want to talk about, contemporary Australian television. You would have to have, the angle that you have on that is what we're looking for as an editor. We're looking for what you're adding to a broader discussion as well. So make sure you're always thinking about more than a topic. What are you specifically saying about it? That's what you're, in an article, what you would be pitching. In a short story, I would say when I was assessing short stories for KYD, I didn't read a single cover letter because it's a short story. I'm going to read the whole story. So I just don't stress about cover letters for short stories. Like, it's not, you don't have to put a synopsis of your short story. You can give a bit of an idea if you want to have, definitely put in the word count. I'll put in the word count and maybe put in a sentence or so about briefly explaining what the short story is, I suppose. You could say this is a short fiction horror about a, girl who is haunted by the ghost of her mother. And then I'll read the whole story. Like, you don't need to put too much detail into a short fiction cover letter.
And something that I think applies to all of these formats, although you might, Justina, correct me and say it's not relevant for the mag, is we're talking a lot about the work, the piece, and obviously that's the core thing we're assessing and looking at. But as Kate mentioned earlier, if we're looking at in the publishing house context, we're looking at you as a potential author. That's a potential colleague of ours for a year and a half. It's also a brand we're marketing. Authors and books are, brands like any sort of major company in our capitalist world. And so that's got to be, we have to position not just the book, but you, and you will be the face of promoting that book. It won't be us. And so an author bio, it if there's nothing relevant in your personal life or professional life that translates to the book, that's fine. But a bio isn't also just a list of, I've done this course or I won this award. That stuff's great, but give us a bit of who you are. Give us a bit of, and they're only short, but in that short bit, if you can give us a bit of flavor of your personality or your spark or something unique about you, that's also really great, because then if there's something that, we can actually, there's a publicity angle or just some level of human connection there, that's actually as important as being interested, almost as important as being interested in the text, is you as an author.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think in a magazine space, that's also true. Not so much that, if a lot of magazines will publish works by the same authors, you're not precluded from that. But it's not in the same way that you would have that consistent sort of working relationship as you would at a publishing house. I think it would, I wouldn't know, but it's a different relationship, but you still will have a relationship with that editor, especially if you keep pitching to them, if you keep publishing with that editor and that magazine. But I think in the bio for a short piece, it's more important to, if you don't have publications, or even if you do already have publications, like something about what is your personal connection to this story, like where does your interest come from and why do you care about it? That can be in your bio. It's especially if you're a young emerging writer and you don't have a lot of publications under your belt, that can be something that you speak to, of how you have an expertise on the topic that you want to write about. So it's not a deal breaker if you don't have publications. That's totally fine. You can just tell us about yourself, and and I would say also, if you have a work that's published, you can link to it, and it will often get read, especially if you haven't published with that editor before and they're not familiar with your work. So linking to your past work is a really good thing to do. It helps, give an idea of what your writing style is like, what your voice is like as a writer. So if you have published works, definitely link to them in your pitch.
Should we talk more? You touched on this, Alex, but should we talk more about the difference between fiction and nonfiction?
Yes. Would you like me to start, or would you like to start?
You can. I'll correct you.
Oh, please. Excellent. So with nonfiction, we're not always, but we'll typically be looking, often with fiction, we'll look at the whole manuscript as well as the cover letter, proposal, etc. Nonfiction, we'll often actually just read a detailed proposal and a few sample chapters that often won't be fully written, or we won't be assessing the whole thing, because we're making a decision based on a different set of parameters there. And so I guess with the nonfiction pitch, it's more important to know more about your credentials. And a memoir, that's a bit more obvious what your credentials are to write that. But if it's more something like you're writing a health book, or you're writing some kind of, a leadership or a business book or something like that, what your credentials are in that space, what your network is like, what people who might promote or endorse the book, what sort of circles you have to promote it wider. Are there other opportunities we can have to explore here or there? A more detailed table of content. So giving us, it's a bit more actually of a business case as well as a creative piece. And so I think and you might, when we're talking comparison titles about the text, that's still very true, but you might actually be also thinking of comparisons of yourself as an author, yourself as a brand, where you might think that a series of books and this might go. So you're actually having that bit more business brand lens on it as well, more than just the artwork you've created, if it's, say, a novel.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty thorough description. I think it is, the proposals that we get for nonfiction usually include like all of those things we've been talking about: synopsis, author bio, comp titles, but it often also includes marketing and publicity ideas, which don't need to be very detailed or very fleshed out. It can be as simple as, I have connections with this media organization, or this writers festival or event platform has a background of, covering this topic, or these are the kind of people I think would give me a quote for the cover and things like that. So it helps us, because we don't have the full manuscript, we usually just have a sample chapter or maybe two. It helps us to envision the book as a product and as something that we can sell, rather than, as Alex said, kind of resting on the sort of creative achievement of the manuscript itself, which is more what we do with fiction. We're kind of looking at it in a more pragmatic way and thinking about how would we sell this, who would we sell it to, who is the reader for this, and what path would we take to get to that reader. So even more so than with fiction, the more detail you can give about all of that external stuff, the better.
Kate, what do you think are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes people make in pitching, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or a smaller publication?
I mean, I think we see this less now that pitches are mostly online, but I think gimmicks is something that people tend to think maybe this will catch an editor's eye if I, write in the voice of the character, or write my cover letter like a ransom note, or send in an envelope full of glitter or something like that. I think that kind of quirkiness, for me personally, is off-putting. I think, again, I'm looking for someone I can have a professional relationship with. I don't want to have a professional relationship with someone who's going to send me ransom notes or glitter bombs. So I think that it seems like a good idea in theory because it's going to make you stand out amongst the hundreds of other pitches, but realistically, it's going to make you stand out in a bad way.
Have the confidence to stand out on your own merit and strength of your pitch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, Kate.
No, I was just going to say, I think the other thing is sort of concision and confidence. I think that if you really think your book is great and lots of people will want to read it, you should be able to convey that. I think that, be ambitious. Pitch it in the way you would pitch it if you were sort of standing on stage and talking to thousands of people about why they should buy it. I think this is your one chance to get people to understand not only how great your book is, but what sort of writer you are, what sort of writer you're going to become, what sort of career you're going to have. And I think that, don't kind of be relaxed or be quiet about that. Be loud, be confident, and back yourself.
Speaking to that point, I feel like it can be tempting to throw in like a self-deprecating joke or a comment like that. I would say never, ever do that. It's not, you have to, don't apologize for your work or be negative about it at all in your pitch, because it's really off-putting, and it makes us question, if you don't believe in your piece, if you don't believe in your own work, what is there for us to sort of also latch onto? I think, you want to be putting your best foot forward, and even if you have imposter syndrome, or even if you I don't know, if you're feeling unconfident, you can just pretend that you are confident, and it will be the exact same effect.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Only thing I'll add to that is that, and I think anyone who's doing this particular course, it won't apply to you, but just, I think often we see pitches that feel rushed or undercooked, or they were read once for typos maybe, and then sent in because you've finished. Oh, I've done the work. I've finished my novel. Great. Let's type the pitch and go. Work on the pitch. Get that right. Take the time. That is not something to rush, because that's probably going to be the first thing we read before we open your work. So do take the time to get that right.
That's such a good point, Alex. And also, with the manuscript as well, if you're pitching a novel, that urge to think, I've finished my draft, I can get this to an editor now. I understand how sort of compelling that is, but take a moment, sit with it, proofread it, make sure that you have made it absolutely the best it can be, because you can't go back to an editor and say, oh, you read an earlier draft, are you happy to read the next draft and the next draft and the next draft? This is your one chance to get someone to have a look at it. So make it as good as you can make it.
We have a question from the audience. what would you say are the major differences between pitching a novel to a publishing house versus pitching a short piece to a magazine or some smaller publication? We've touched on this a little bit, but I would say, as I said before, if it's fiction, I think the cover letter is a lot less important when pitching short fiction than it would be with a novel. And, you know, as Alex and Kate have been talking about, how you're positioning yourself as an author and as in terms of your career as well, is a lot less important with a piece of short fiction. At the end of the day, with short fiction, it's going to be the piece itself, and it's going to be, your writing will speak for itself a lot. But, you know, just that bare bones information, an author bio, a brief author bio, that's all you really need when pitching short fiction.
Yeah.
Should we go to the next step, pull back the curtain on once the thing's been read? What's happening? Kate, what's happening behind the scenes at a publishing house once we've read your work and love it, the pitch part's been successful?
Well, it's also like, let's be realistic. It's going to take us a while to read it. There's, you know, it's such a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. Publishers are always swamped with manuscripts that they need to read. So if it feels like it's taking forever for your manuscript to even be read, we apologize for that, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. There's only so many hours in the day and only so many things that we can get to at any one time. So it's not unusual for manuscripts to sit for even a month or two waiting for someone to clap eyes on them. But if we read it, we like you, probably the next step for me with a new author particularly would be arranging a time to meet. You know, once upon a time that would have been maybe with a coffee in the real world. Nowadays that's probably a Zoom call or a phone call. And that's really to get a sense, again, of what our working relationship would be like. And for me to understand if we're on the same page, if we have the same editorial thoughts about your book, if you have the same ambitions for your book as I do. And also, like, to be really crass about it, to get a sense of whether you're someone we can put in front of a radio microphone, you know, what sort of promotion are you going to be capable of? Which is not to say that everyone has to be a pristine public speaker or, you know, to have TV experience or anything like that. We can work with whatever we need to work with, but it just adds to the conversation that we have about, you know, this person will not be great for radio, but they'll be fantastic on social media. Or this person has no social media presence, but they'll be great at festivals. Or this person would be no good at festivals, but they'll be great at signing books in bookshops. So it's all of those sort of different questions that we ask ourselves. And then the next step after that, like as I said before, is we start pitching in-house. So you have pitched to me. It's my turn to pitch now. And my pitch goes to all of my colleagues in-house, which would be colleagues from sales, marketing, publicity, and other editors or publishers within the company. And I think people get a bit scared of this stage because they think it's, you know, sales and marketing are going to have this really mean and aggressive take on things, and they're not creative and they're not artistic and they're going to boss the editors around. And it's just not true. I mean, everyone who is in publishing is there because they love books and they love reading and they want authors to succeed. So it's no bad thing to have these professional readers going through your manuscript really carefully and thinking about the potential for it. And so once they've read, we talk about it and talk about, like, to be really blunt about it. And this is true across every publishing house. This is not solely a Pan Macmillan thing. The question we ask ourselves is, how many copies of this book can we sell? And that will inform whether or not you receive an offer, and then also the size of that offer.
We have a question about book publishing. How long should you wait after you've pitched a manuscript before you try going to another publisher?
Well, book publishing, and I think this is quite different to magazine publishing, so you might speak to it separately, Justina, but book publishing, you're very welcome, and it's very common to submit to more than one publisher at once. So long as you're open about that, and so long as you just keep everyone up to date about what is happening, if you receive an offer, or if, you've got your manuscript with 3 or 4 different publishers, as long as I know that, I have no problem with that whatsoever. And that, if anything, it'll probably, make me more likely to read your manuscript more quickly, because I'll think, well, I've got to at least be in the game with these other people if they're reading it too. So yeah, there's no problem at all about submitting simultaneously, so long as you're open about it and keep everyone up to date.
And if you're in direct it depends how you first got us to read your manuscript, obviously, but if you are at the point you're in contact with a publisher over it, most of the time we will give you a sort of timeline of when our next meeting is, when you can have an idea of knowing an answer or not, so you'll know. And if we're at that more pre-stage where we're still reading and we haven't got to a meeting stage yet, you don't have less of a definitive timeline, and other publishers are showing interest, then use that. Tell us that, because that will get our skates on, as Kate's alluded to. And yeah, because before we enter any kind of arrangement, you're not tied to one publisher, so you shouldn't feel that long waiting period goes against you by any means. But if we're in an open conversation, we'll generally, we don't want to keep you waiting in painful limbo for longer than we have to. Trust us.
Yeah.
And on the magazine side of that, definitely check the submissions guidelines. So some magazines don't accept simultaneous submissions, but a lot of the time I think it's actually quite similar. Like, unless the magazine specifies that they don't accept simultaneous submissions, it's that as long as you're open about that, you have pitched it elsewhere, and as long as you let the editor know if it gets picked up elsewhere as soon as you know that, then it's okay to do that. But the only thing about that I would say is that, going back to an earlier point about making sure you're researching your market before you pitch. So your pitch should be targeted to the publication that you're pitching to, and you should be aware of, what they publish, what kind of writing they have recently, and what they've covered before. And if you're writing a really good targeted pitch, you can say that you've pitched like a similar story elsewhere, but it would feel weird if you're pitching the exact targeted story to like a whole array of different magazines, especially if you're being very specific. But yeah, it's normally okay so long as you keep the editor in the loop of what's going on. In terms of, I guess, what acquisitions would be like in a magazine, or like how we assess pitches, the way we used to do it, I mean, I'm sure they still do it similarly, but while I was at KYD, we would have a specific day of the week where we would assess all the new pitches we had in our submittable inbox and discuss it as a team. And it's an ongoing conversation. They all get read with, in good faith. We want to find a really good piece of writing and a really good addition to the magazine. And a lot of the questions we're talking about are, how does this fit within our magazine? Is this something that our readers are going to connect with? Is it too similar or from what we've published before? Sometimes that can be, and this is something that's really out of control of an author. Sometimes we have something in the works that's really similar to what something's been pitched. And even if it's a really good pitch, that you have something coming out, within the next couple of weeks that's really a really similar topic. So yeah, it's a lot about how does it fit into what we're doing.
We don't have a huge amount of time left. We could take some questions if anyone has any, but also we could talk about sort of that final stage of what happens next if you are either accepted or sadly rejected.
Well, if you're accepted, champagne. That's it. That's the answer there. I mean, if you're accepted, you'll get a very excited call or email from the editor or publisher, and the sort of key terms will then be outlined in a written offer, and then we'll progress through the business sides like deal memo and a publishing agreement. And once the business part's done, get stuck into the fun parts, the editing, structural, developmental, copy, talk about covers, get the publicity, marketing strategy underway, and all the exciting parts. And that's a different workshop, but that's the sunshine and rainbows end of it.
Yeah.
Kate, do you want to talk on the...
Not to sort of rain on Alex's sunshine and rainbows is, we've talked a lot about how this is a professional relationship and that editors consider that. And I think for writers, that's really important for you to consider as well. You are also committing to an ongoing professional relationship with this person and this company. And so even though it can feel like that letter of acceptance or letter of offer is the end of the road, there's actually a lot more to come after that, and hopefully a long career for you to have after that. So think carefully about, is the editorial feedback you've been given, does that align with your vision for the book? When they talk to you about how they will publish this book, does that align with what you want to see? Think about where you want to be in 5 years and 10 years. And, is this the publisher that's going to get you there? So do, get excited, drink the champagne and, take a moment to celebrate, but also think carefully and ask those questions. Editors are always happy to answer those questions and really excited when writers pose them, because that developing that relationship and that sort of early stage of an author's career is really important, and we're really passionate about it. So we're always happy to chat about that and to, give you as much information as possible as you sort of start this next step.
It's champagne that night, then tea or coffee, roll your sleeves up the next day.
Exactly.
And I guess then on rejection, listen to what the rejection reason is, because a lot of the, we have had to reject sometimes great novels that weren't the right fit for us. And there's a whole sort of multitude of reasons why that might be. It's not to never take it personally, and never, if you receive an encouraging rejection letter, although you will feel discouraged and disheartened, hold on and keep going. The number of times I have seen something that one publisher's rejected, that another one at a different house takes up the same auction cycle
any
months later.
BYO in the magazine realm. But if you're accepted, you get an email from the editor commissioning the piece from you.
I think we've lost Justina again. Yeah, that's completely true, Alex. Publishing is so subjective and so personal. As Justina said before, it can be that we have another book coming that's similar that we can't make room for both, or it could just be that it's not my personal taste, which is not to say that it's not going to be Alex's personal taste or a publisher at a different publishing house. So those considerations are, things to think about and not take things to heart. And the other thing I would say, if editors offer you feedback or give you some kind of encouragement, take that on board and really run with it. I had an author who sent me an unsolicited submission, which I read and enjoyed but didn't love. And I gave her just the smallest amount of editorial feedback when I declined it. And she rewrote the whole thing based on that and sent it back to me. And it was fantastic. And I picked it up, published it, and it was really successful. And I think that, people offer feedback and those kind of responses with the spirit of generosity and a spirit of, creative partnership. So do take that on board and, think about whether that's something you want to apply to your work.
I'll just quickly add a couple of things. That firstly, and Kate, I know you agree, we want you all to succeed. And then what you alluded to earlier, Kate, about the publicity and marketing, and there's perceptions that they'll be telling the editors no, it'll be nasty or whatnot. We all love books, and we all want, therefore, to find the next great book by the next great writer. So if it can't work in this one particular scenario, we feel bad for that too. And we want you to succeed. And if you find that success somewhere else, that's great. And we all have, stories of a failure turning into success. I pitched 2 novels in a row, one where I rejected it, but given some feedback, the author did the work, resubmitted it. I loved it, pitched it. We gave them a deal. And the next one, I loved it, but we couldn't, as a company, make an offer. and then a few months later they found a different home. And it's just keep at it. Persistence is key, and as long as you back yourself and your work, that's all you can ask to do.
Yeah. And one last quick question before we wrap up, which is, when pitching a novel, does an author definitely need to have the entire manuscript finished before thinking about pitching to publishers? My answer to that is a wholehearted yes. And not only do you need to have it finished, but you need to have let it sit in your drawer for a while, gone back to it, reworked it, proofread it, polish it absolutely as much as you can, because that's your chance. And if it feels half-baked, I'm going to feel like you are not taking yourself seriously and you're not taking your career seriously. Or I'm just going to think that that is all you're capable of. So yes, absolutely finish it, and finish it to the absolute best of your capability.
And one other quick question I'll answer: is it common practice for magazine or publishing houses to let the writer know if their pitch submission was not successful? I won't speak for a magazine, but for a publishing house, if you're submitting to the slush pile of a publisher or an agent, their guidelines will normally say, if you've not heard within this period of time, assume it's a polite no. That is generally the practice for most publishers. If you're in direct contact with us through whatever means, then I would generally suspect you'll get a yes or no from the publisher if you're in actual solicited contact with them. So it just depends on the nature of how you've come to reach them.
Yeah.
For magazines, often you'll send a rejection email, but it usually won't contain any feedback. It'll usually be fairly plain. But that's about all we have time for. So thanks, Alex, and thanks, Kate, for joining this conversation. Sorry about the connection issues that I had on my end. And good luck to everyone watching. Happy pitching, I suppose. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.